Visenya, why is there so much water? I don't remember Dorne having this much water.
Ah, those Vhagar memes. And yes, House of Flying D's now in session. Hey there, friends. I know we're all still recovering from that amazing debut episode, and I personally am very glad to not be the only one screaming from the mountaintop about how good it is. I'm glad you all are in on the House of the Dragon fun now. We're all in the House of the Dragon, which is the Dragon Pit, by the way. That's the literal House of the Dragon. That's where they live. Now, I'm working on a video with some of my main takeaways from the episode so that there's something shorter to watch than the 3-hour live stream that we did after the show. Lots to discuss, of course. But I thought I would go ahead and break down the In the Weeks Ahead trailer first with this tasty little snack of a video to get the week started.
From my blood come the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire.
The burden of this knowledge, it is larger than the throne. It is larger than you.
All right, so first off, it's right into the prophecy talk with Rhaenyra apparently reading Aegon's prophecy off of the Valyrian glyphs on Viserys' Valyrian steel knife. Now, one thing that I was really excited by from the first episode of House of the Dragon is that the show would seem to be operating inside the canon of the books and not the Game of Thrones show. After all, Aegon's prophecy about a Targaryen needing to sit the throne to unite the kingdom in order to fight the others just does not fit at all with the Game of Thrones show ending, where Bran Stark gave Arya Stark the knife to kill the Night King with. And Dany and Jon, the blood of the dragon, were essentially sidelined. That is, until Dany tries to take the throne, after the Long Night threat is ended and the kingdom no longer needs to be unified, which of course never made any sense at all. On the other hand, Aegon's prophecy does make a lot of sense if A Song of Ice and Fire is going to end with, you know, Jon and Dany giving everything they have to fight the others, and also with the idea that Jon and or Dany needs to unify the kingdom before fighting the others. Again, I just...
Game of Thrones Season 8 ending was good, actually.
So what this means is that we're one step closer to pretending the Game of Thrones ending never happened. And House of the Dragon seems a lot more concerned with building up the book lore around Jon and Dany and the prince that was promised than it does going back to try to fix the bad ending of Game of Thrones, which is very good because you can't fix that thing. And if there is a Jon Snow show, I really hope that they find a story that moves on from the Season 8 plot as opposed to trying to go back to fix it. Now, I noticed there's an interesting juxtaposition of an image of Viserys and Allison over the voice of Rhaenyra reading Aegon's prophecy. And this seems like it might be intended to raise the question of whose line will lead to Dany, which prince, etc. I mean, Viserys had a dream about putting his heir on the throne and thought it was Aemma's kid, and it wasn't. So we have to ask, how is Viserys supposed to know which of his potential bloodlines is going to lead to this promised prince who will save the world? There's really no way for him to know. By this, we can see that the burden of prophetic knowledge is truly terrible. I mean, the stakes of the message couldn't be higher, but the message itself is cryptic and vague. That's exactly what Maester Aemon meant when he said that the dragon dreams killed his brothers and relatives. Daeron the drunkard turned to alcoholism in order to try to chase dreamless sleep. And Rhaegar accidentally started a war trying to produce the children that the prophecy was speaking of. Now, Mad King Aerys was definitely a sadist, that's very clear, but it's also very likely that he was having dragon dreams as well, that he definitely wasn't understanding correctly and were probably driving him mad to some extent. So it's very interesting to see a Targaryen deal with this pressure in real time, because we've only ever heard about the dragon dreamers from the outside, save for Daenerys. Dany will have to wrestle with this kind of burden in the final books as she becomes aware of the White Walker threat and the Azor High prophecies. However, Viserys and now young Rhaenyra are really smack in the middle of wrestling with this burden, and we saw the horror that can unfold when the dream turns out to mean something other than what the dreamer thinks. The reason Viserys was so confident about his child being a son is because he had this dream about his son being born with a crown and about placing his heir on the throne. Aemma Arryn actually took it in part as a warning about the dangers of childbirth, particularly the idea of the child being born with a crown, which is metal and sharp. And she was at least partially right. That crown seemingly symbolized the knives that cut her when the baby was born. This reminded me of a line from A Feast for Crows, where Arianne is attempting to crown Myrcella Baratheon queen in order to start a rebellion. And I believe it's Darkstar that says, to crown her is to kill her. Of course, the throne that these monarchs sit on is made of swords, so all of these ideas are basically touching on the same theme, which is the peril of trying to hold power as a monarch. Or you might even say as a dragon-riding barbarian warlord, because there's really not much difference. So here we see young Rhaenyra practicing gazing off into the distance on Dragonstone, which will apparently be a major pastime of hers in the future. She does receive a lot of bad news, to be fair, as does almost everyone in this story. Now, far more exciting is this picture of crowned Rhaenyra, even though it's only from behind.
Turn around.
Damon says, and the audience is like, who, me? This shot of a Kingsguard offering up the crown to someone is perhaps a scene where the crown is being offered to Rhaenyra, but we'll have to wait and see. Then we get this super spicy exchange between adult Rhaenyra and Allison, just to let you know where things are going to get to.
I will be queen of the 7 kingdoms.
May do as you wish, when I am cold in my grave.
All right, now that's how you get ready to start a war. All right. This friendship turns into a bitter rivalry thing. And sometimes that's how it works. You know, a friendship that goes wrong can produce a very, very bitter rivalry. And that seems to be what's happening here.
Dreams didn't make us kings. Dragons did.
So we've heard this line several times now, and I get the feeling that it's Damon speaking to adult Rhaenyra on the eve of using their dragons. Perhaps Rhaenyra has just told Damon about Aegon's prophecy, which I don't think Damon knows about at this point. That makes the most sense to me, that they would be talking about Aegon, because Aegon is the one who made the Targaryens kings. Favoring dragons over dreams also makes sense to me as something that Damon would say in response to Aegon's prophecy. Damon is a very hands-on kind of guy, after all.
Let the people remember the ancient strength of House Targaryen.
So this line is probably Allison trying to buck up Viserys a little bit, as Viserys is somebody who needs a little bit of bucking up sometimes. And what's interesting to me is to consider Allison's place in the Targaryen family. I mean, yes, she's a Hightower and she always wears the green dress and all that, but she married a Targaryen and eventually has Targaryen children, so she's definitely surrounded by dragons. It'll be very interesting to see what her relationship is to the entire concept of dragon identity and all that. And we already saw her a little bit hesitant right in that first scene when Rhaenyra's talking about saddling Syrax for 2 and giving Allison a ride. And she's like, yeah, that's all right, that's all right. 10-foot pole, 10-foot pole. Of course, instead of a 10-foot pole, Allison's father Otto recommends using her mother's dress to approach the dragons. Yeah. Which is to say that Allison is going to be, again, in the midst of the dragons, whether she wants to or not. So how will she handle that? Will Viserys tell her about Aegon's prophecy, for example? Does Allison ever come to understand the real stakes of the Targaryens and the Iron Throne and the Long Night and all that? That seems like an important question that will be answered in the weeks ahead. Speaking of Sir Otto, we've got him uttering a little bit of that Sir Otto wisdom here.
No king has ever lived that hasn't had to forfeit the lives of a few to protect the many.
Now, while this is, of course, technically true, I'm highly dubious of Otto's motives in saying this to his 18-year-old daughter as he instructs her on how to manipulate the king. We have to ask, just what awful thing is he trying to rationalize here? Sir Otto is definitely off to a great start as a villain, that's for sure.
You are no conqueror. You are a plague.
Uh-oh, Damon's in trouble. Again. You can see here he's in his small clothes, so this is definitely the same scene that we've been seeing where the Kingsguard is throwing Damon down on the floor. He's no doubt been caught in one of his major scandals, and Fire and Blood readers will probably have a good idea which one this is. And clearly, Viserys is now at his wit's end with his brother. We can imagine Damon was perhaps trying to compare himself and his true dragon nature to Aegon the Conqueror. But of course, Viserys knows what Aegon was actually doing and thinking about when he conquered, so it's pretty easy for him to dismiss that and spit out the retort, "You aren't a conqueror, you're a plague." Remember that at this point, Damon will have essentially conquered the Stepstones, with a little bit of help from Corlys Velaryon's family. So he does have some basis to feel like Aegon the Conqueror reborn, perhaps. And of course, he's comparing himself to his brother's relative weakness, but there's more going on with Viserys than Damon probably understands. And you know how that could be fixed? Viserys telling Damon about the prophecy and what the Targaryens are really doing on the throne, but it doesn't seem like he's done that. Protagonists keeping too many secrets in fantasy stories is usually not a good idea, and it's definitely not a good idea for the House of the Dragon to have its sons divided against one another. Judging from this scene, it seems that at some point, Sir Otto will have successfully driven a major wedge between the two brothers. And this is certainly a large part of where all the trouble starts.
Our houses are bound by a common cause.
Trouble? Who said anything about trouble? Look at all these sweet kids. Wholesome. Yes. These are the children of Rhaenyra and Laenor, or possibly Rhaenyra and Harwin, Jacaerys and Lucerys, with Damon and Laena's children, Baela and Rhaena. And without getting into spoiler territory here, I'll just say that as the families get larger on this show, they'll definitely get more convoluted, and we'll see the alliances shift and change in some pretty interesting ways. It's pretty easy to get Corlys's vibe from this little snippet of speech here. His presence is something like that of a massive oak tree, someone who's been tested and tested again, solid and sturdy. They've lived to tell the tale, and you can count on them being there tomorrow. Yeah, he's basically like an anchor or a rock or an oak tree. I guess anchor would be the right metaphor since he's a seafaring dude. So between Corlys and Princess Rhaenys, his wife, the Velaryons are bringing massive gravitas, knowledge, strategy, forces, and wealth to the table of whomever they ally with.
Perhaps, but there will be blood.
Ah yes, this sounds like Damon talking about some sort of plan to take care of some sort of vexing problem. And Damon definitely doesn't sound too upset at the possibility of bloodshed. Quite the opposite. It's definitely a wicked and sinister line here, and God only knows what plan they're cooking up. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Just a little quick hitter. I'll have more videos coming this week, like I was saying. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and I'll see you again very soon.